Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We'll give it a couple of minutes as people are magically transported into the Zoom space. I hope everyone has had a good conference so far. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, and thank you so much for joining us for this session. I hope your conference week has been great. My name is Monique Clark, and I'll be moderating this session. I'm glad to welcome Willa Tavernier, Open Scholarship Librarian at Indiana University, Bloomington, Kalani Adolfo from the University of Miami, Michelle Peralta, Resident Archivist for Yale Special Collections at Yale University Library, Maya Bergamasco, Faculty Research and Scholarly Support Librarian from Harvard Law School Library, Mallory Rawls, Humanities Librarian from Florida State University, Laura Dardania from the Texas State Library and Archives Commission, and Anna Corial from the University of Houston. They will be presenting library preparedness, formalizing and supporting the diversity residency experience using a resident-centered framework. Before we get started, let's go over a few logistical items. As you heard, this session is being recorded. Captions are available during this session by clicking on the Live CC button at the bottom of your Zoom window. Thank you to Stephanie Goffigan for providing these. Please use the Q&A feature for any presentation questions. You can choose to do this anonymously, and there will be 10 through 15 minutes for the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Please use the chat for general comments or technical issues. Shanti will be monitoring the chat for any questions and comments. Shanti will also be adding some links into the chat. One is for collaborative resource sharing. And if you think of a related reading, podcast, video, or something else, please share it with us in CALM's recommended resources document or in the chat. Due to Google Docs limitations, we ask that you close out the document after you have added a resource. One of our volunteers will drop this information into the chat. And then last but not least, be sure to adhere to our conference code of conduct, which should also be in a chat. And now I will turn things over to our presenter.
Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. Thank you so much for being here and welcome. We are excited to present our session today, Library Preparedness, Formalizing and Supporting the Diversity Resident Experience Using a Resident-Centered Framework. We may be referring to this as RCF. The authors of this toolkit are here today, and you will be hearing from them through this presentation. The other thing we'd like to note is that we will have time at the end of this session for questions, so please utilize the question and answer or the question box and drop them throughout the session. And again, welcome and thank you so much for taking time to be here. I will go ahead and turn it over to Michelle.
Thank you for that, Laura. I think, next slide, please. Thank you. We'll start a little bit talking about the need for this subgroup, our charge and our goals. So we are a subgroup of the Residency Interest Group, or RIG, which is a collection of current and former residents that work to support one another in our development and interests through collaborative projects and peer mentorship. So in that sense, RIG is a group of residents that works with other residents for residents. And in the spring of 2019, the then RIG convener, Tamanna Hodge, put out a call for participants for a new diversity residency subgroup that would explore questions related to the successes and challenges of residencies. So from personal accounts shared informally among residents and also formally through articles and publications, we were able to see like a wide disparity between residency experiences. It was felt that there was a need for more guidance, structure, and formalization of residencies across the board. And we felt that given the Diversity Alliance, their structure and their letter of commitment, which is a agreement between the institutions who are joining this alliance and what their commitments are to their residents and the residencies, that letter was too broad and left the host institutions with too wide a berth to interpret the commitments, which ultimately left the resident in a vulnerable position. And no one is as greatly or negatively impacted by a failed residency than the resident themselves. So as residents, we did not feel empowered to make changes to the ACRL Diversity Alliance commitments, because they're a separate group from RIG. And so we took it upon ourselves to develop the means and the tools for formalizing residencies in order to enhance residency experiences. And as a group, formed and we discussed our goals, the group's charge became narrower and more specific, and so we ended up with these goals that are on the screen, and our charge is at the very top. So we will identify, critically examine, and assess current ACRL Diversity Alliance member residency programs to establish the efficacy of current programs and develop best practices. And then our goals of to conduct an environmental analysis of residencies, practices and procedures, develop guidelines for assessing the preparedness of potential host institutions, and create best practices for onboarding residents. With that, I will pass it to Laura and Mallory.
Hello. Sorry. So we met these goals through a couple of projects and activities. We did a landscape analysis, which included a lit review and a review of the ACRL Diversity Alliance commitments. We found that there was limited literature on residencies, and up until quite recently, there was a general lack of documentation, best practices, or guidance in how to structure residencies, leading them to imaginations and capacities of the host institutions. This, combined with the lack of specificity of outcomes, assessment, and expectations set forth by the Diversity Alliance, often left the door open for broad interpretation, which we can contribute to the breadth of residencies experiences. Through this landscape analysis, we had a number of takeaways, which I'm going to pass over to Laura, and she will talk about those.
Thank you, Mallory. And so first, and perhaps surprisingly, residencies tend to center on the institution rather than the resident. Residents are seen as a benefit to the institution, but not always or not primarily for the resident. And this can be seen in such things as the badge that ACRL Diversity Alliance institutions receive for their membership, but the lack of accountability and assessment of these residency programs that these institutions host. And for anyone that's unaware of what a residency position is, they are positions designed to bring underrepresented folks into academic libraries. In some positions, they rotate through different spaces. Some are housed in just one specific area of concentration. And so through the takeaways that we also found in the lack of follow-up to see how residencies have been impacted or how they impact the careers and their professional outlooks. It can be seen in the very existence of RIG, which is, as Michelle mentioned earlier, by residents for residents, as well as in the very work of this subgroup to fill the gaps that are needed to support residencies in these positions. Secondly, and closely related, it is because because institutions and or professions see residencies as addressing a pipeline issue rather than a retention issue or advancement issue, that we found that there was an overemphasis on placement, but that same emphasis was not given to building in the infrastructure to retain the resident either, whether it was by permanent placement or even making sure that the residents felt supported and welcome so that they would be encouraged to stay in the profession. A successful residency from the viewpoint of an institution typically is that the resident lands a permanent job, while from the viewpoint of the residents, success often translates to feeling supported, encouraged, and excited about the work that they do. Third, professional development opportunities were often not only inconsistent, but not always encouraged or supported. And so with all this in mind, we published the Diversity Residency Toolkit in the summer of 2021. The toolkit takes what we found from our landscape analysis and combines recommendations into 4 tools that are designed to provide structure and support for the resident from concept, meaning before the resident steps foot on the campus, to implementation of the residency and beyond. So this includes post-residency as well. And I will go ahead and turn it over to the next slide.
Okay, so I'm going to be talking a little bit more about the resident-centered framework, or the RCF. So we've established that the ACRL Diversity Alliance benefits the institutions and not the resident. So in principle, the Diversity Alliance asks members to make commitments to support residents. So on the ACRL Diversity Alliance website, it says things like commit to designing experiences to expand the residents' interests and skills, which includes mentorship and rotation through library units, which is all well and good. But as we've established, based on our literature review and on personal experience, the residents do not feel supported and have not fully received the benefits pledged to them by the institution. So we've created the toolkit with the resident-centered framework, which centers the resident's experience. It recognizes that there are hierarchies and systems of power in place in academic institutions that marginalize a resident's perspective and the development of residencies, which can leave residents feel vulnerable in an unsafe working environment. So there's 3 main principles to the RCF. The first one is centering the residents' perspectives and honoring their experience. So for the example that I mentioned earlier about a rotational structure, it's great to have a rotational structure where, for example, a resident may spend 3 months in tech services and then another 3 months in access services, another 3 months in reference and research, so on and so forth. But that rotational structure must come from the resident's stated goals and interests and not from a decision based on the institution. So the second principle is upholding the resident as the primary audience and beneficiary. So what this means is the components of this toolkit, especially the pre-residency checklist, are meant to prompt the institutions to reflect more deeply on why they're offering a diversity residency in the first place. It's asking you questions like, can the institution realistically support the resident? And what are the shortcomings and how can they be remedied? And then the last principle is committing to transparency. So in recognizing that the resident is the primary beneficiary of a residency program, and that decision-making processes are defined by their stated interests and goals, the institutions need to be transparent about the decisions that they're making and intentional about the outcomes. So I'm going to pass it on to Mallory. Oh no, I'm not, I'm passing it on to myself. So the Diversity Resident Toolkit itself, you can read it, you can read the whole toolkit and view it on the ACRL Diversity Residency Interest Group website. And I'm going to put that in the chat, or someone will put it in the chat. We are going to quickly talk about the licensing. So the licensing for this is the attribution non-commercial share alike 4.0 international license, which is a big, long mouthful that basically means that you're allowed to distribute, remix, adapt, and build upon the material in any medium or format for non-commercial purposes only, and as long as you give attribution back to us as the creators. If you want to remix or adapt anything, you're welcome to share it as long as you license it under the same terms, under identical terms. And then the next thing we're going to talk about, we're going to dive a little bit more deeply into the 4 main components. So the 4 main components are guidelines for establishing residency planning and steering committees, the pre-residency checklist for institutions that I mentioned earlier, the guidelines for establishing a mentorship program, and last but not least, the residency support survey. So now I'm going to pass it on.
Hello. So first, we're going to talk about guidelines to establishing a residency planning and steering committee. The purpose of establishing both a residency planning committee and a residency steering committee is to provide structure and support for the resident from the initial planning stages through the end of the residency. The planning committee is a short-term committee that should set goals, evaluations, and assessment for the program. The residency steering committee, on the other hand, is intended to be a continuous support system for the resident or the cohort that offers guidance throughout their residency timeline and experience. So the purpose of a residency planning committee is to develop the residency program, including a planning document, an overview, understanding, and utilization of the diversity residency toolkit, working with the search committee to draft a position description and serve as a resource for the search committee. If the residency is rotational, the planning committee should define the purpose and scope of the rotations. And if the residency is not rotational, the planning committee should define the purpose, scope, and areas for growth. The planning committee is going to decide on the membership of the residency steering committee. This is a chance to think critically about the purpose and the role for each person on the steering committee. And at least one member of the planning committee should be appointed to the search committee. Membership of the residency planning committee could consist of the residency coordinator, planning library stakeholders such as the dean, the chancellor, the university provost, and representatives from campus partners that are associated with DEI initiatives. The residency steering committee is a committee that serves as a group of peers and library workers that the resident may go to for assistance that exists outside their reporting structure in case of any issues of placement. So the steering committee can provide assistance with post-residency job searches and help prepare for job interviews, with mock interviews, with their CVs and cover letters, etc. If there is a learning plan, then reviewing the learning plan and the goals of the residents to ensure that the activities are appropriate to the residents' goals. Membership of this committee should include a residency coordinator, representatives from the library, including library workers, faculty members from the library and information science program, if one exists on your campus, but this can be an optional member if you don't have an LIS program, a representative from the university or library related DEI initiatives, or relevant campus partners. No resident supervisor should be appointed to this committee. We understand that not every institution has the capacity to establish both committees or the workforce to establish both. Each committee has specific goals and purposes, and the subgroup deemed necessary and important to make them distinct committees. In doing so, this emphasizes and incorporates key aspects of the resident-centered framework. And now I'm going to pass it to Kalani and Michelle to talk about the pre-residency checklist.
I think I'm actually the only one covering this section, but maybe I'm wrong. So I'm going to be talking about the pre-residency checklist for institutions. So we were really interested in developing a tool that would measure whether a host institution was prepared to host diversity residents, since that's such an important factor in resident success. So this tool is designed to be robust enough to account for many activities, tasks, and other support mechanisms that are important for hosting diversity residents, but also be flexible enough to account for different situations. So it's not prescriptive in nature. It's intended more so to provide an overall picture of a residency. So the checklist is divided into 6 sections, which I'm going to get into in a little bit. The but the format is that a question is presented that should have a yes or no answer. So for example, has an organizational climate evaluation been conducted to assess and uncover staff and faculty attitudes towards diversity and inclusion? And if the answer is yes, you just go to the next question. But if the answer is no, then the checklist asks for clarifying notes or plans for remediation, then ultimately who is responsible for following up on those remediation plans. So the point of the checklist is really just to help institutions understand that there's a lot of pre-planning work that needs to go into residency programs. It isn't so much that every single checklist item has to be yes before you host a resident, although that would be really nice. But the checklist should more so help show what areas of residency planning need more attention. This helps institution know where to focus their efforts and to know if they're in a good position to be hosting a residency. It also furthers our goals of centering the resident experience over big picture institutional DEI goals. Next slide, please. So as I said, we broke the checklist down into 6 different sections, which I'm going to go over a little bit. So the first is administrative actions, which is maybe a little bit obvious. So it covers administrative preparedness for both diversity initiatives broadly, as well as the diversity residency program specifically. So the big picture questions are about things like climate surveys, any organizational issues a climate survey might have revealed, as well as things like the strategic plan. And then the questions about the residency cover things like the goals and objectives of implementing a diversity residency program, the position title, and if the job description is appropriate for an early career professional. The second section is residency operations, which is a bunch of questions that are to help ensure that the appropriate people are in place to help the residency run smoothly. This includes things like having residency steering committee and residency coordinator, a clear line of reporting, ongoing and iterative assessment of the residency program, and then checking in on staff preparedness in those placement or rotation departments. The third section is institutional training, which mostly deals with questions around DEI and like cultural competency. The section is to check in on how prepared the supervisor, steering committee, residency coordinator, et cetera, are, and if they're familiar with things like what microaggressions are, how to interrupt them, and then ways to navigate and handling conflict, which is likely to come up. The fourth section is mentorship, which ties in with the mentorship section of the overall toolkit. It includes questions around how mentors are selected and also covers an important distinction between resident mentors and mentors for permanent positions, which is namely that mentorship for residents needs to include assistance in career planning and opportunities both inside and outside of the host institution. The fifth section is resident professional development and leadership training. So one of the things we suggest is additional professional development funds for residents beyond what's normally offered, because since residencies are temporary positions, residents will be back on the job market pretty quickly. So having more opportunities to be more competitive on the job market would be really helpful. We also wanted to make sure the people that are involved in residency operations, such as the coordinator, steering committee, et cetera, are helping identify opportunities for professional development and leadership for the resident. And then lastly, emotional impact on resident and prospects of retention in the field. This section is really important, and I think it's a perspective that we found was missing from a lot of the literature and resources about preparing host institutions for residencies. So the questions here really center the resident's experience at the host institution beyond things like training and things that someone could put on their CV. So it ties more into the retention aspect we've been talking about. So basically, is the residency going to accomplish what it's supposed to do, or is it going to serve as some sort of anti-pipeline driving people out of the profession? I'm actually going to show a few of these questions because I think that they're important. Next slide, please. So here are the example questions for that section. The first is, are there any culture, climate, or staff and faculty issues that need to be addressed and planned for prior to the arrival of the resident? And in the toolkit, we have two examples that we provide. The first is if there's like a coworker who's known to make racial or gender-based microaggressions and they're managed around rather than dealt with directly. Another example of this could be if one of the proposed placements or rotations is in a department with high turnover. So these are just two examples, but institutions using this checklist should take the time to reflect on areas of concern that might be present at their institution. Another example is there a plan or procedure in place for how to address employees or patrons making racial or other microaggressions for the resident? This one's really important. If you're hiring people from marginalized groups, it's likely to come up. So you should have a plan in place for how you handle these sorts of issues. Another example is, has there been reflection and communication about what intentions or expectations, both implicit and explicit, the institution will be putting on the resident? Some examples of this that would be harmful for a resident would be treating the resident as a change agent for the institution, or using the resident as sort of a test subject for diversity initiatives. So the point of this section of the toolkit and this part of the checklist is really just to make sure that the institution, the supervisor, and relevant stakeholders for the residency program are really reflecting on their preparedness for hosting a resident in a way that centers the resident beyond things just like, do we have the funds? Do we have the office space for them? Do we have staff? Do we have rotations planned? So thinking beyond just those logistical things and actually centering the resident. Inviting early career librarians into dysfunctional or harmful work environments, or putting unfair expectations on them to solve diversity issues isn't going to help solve BIPOC retention issues in the profession. And instead, that is what creates the retention issues. So this checklist is one of the ways that we're encouraging that resident-centered framework we've been talking about. Next slide, I think, Laura, you're up.
Thank you, Kalani. So the next couple slides are going to be focused on, or in this next section of the toolkit, focuses on establishing a mentorship program. Again, because of the inconsistencies in support models across institutions, we created guidelines for developing a mentorship program specifically for residencies. These guidelines are designed for residents, resident coordinators, and the resident steering committee. And the goal of these guidelines is to serve to develop and build on the residents' professional and interpersonal skills. The scope of the guidelines are meant to inform the development or enhance your library's current mentorship program, but the actual creation of the mentorship program for the residency program was out of the scope of the work for this toolkit. And so the mentorship section is divided into 5 parts, which include a suggested timeline for mentorship programs for resident coordinators and residency supervisors. The second section is mentorship program guidelines, specifically for resident coordinators or resident supervisors. The third section is mentorship program guidelines for residents. The fourth section is mentorship program guidelines for mentors. And then we've also included additional resources for mentorship and leadership development. And Anna will go ahead and elaborate on these sections on the next couple slides. Anna.
Slide, please. Can you all hear me okay? Okay, good. So as Laura previously mentioned, we included an example of what you would see in the toolkit for guidelines for establishing a mentorship program. So the guidelines start with a suggested timeline, then move on to program guidelines for residents, mentors, and residency coordinators or supervisors, and then we end with some resources. So we broke up the first year of the residency mentorship program guidelines into the first 3 months, then 4 to 9 months, and then in the first year. So on the left is a screen grab of the first section of the toolkit, the suggested timeline that has a list of best practices to implement in the first year of the residency, along with the suggested timeline. And so on the right, you can see the structure of the checklist with a yes or no section and a note section included. This checklist, specifically for residency coordinators and resident supervisors, offers a way to practice accountability and best practices, with the note section offering the opportunity to reflect on why or why not you have answered the questions and what your institution is doing to address them. Next slide, please. So on this slide, you can see what the guidelines look like for the resident on the left and then the residency mentors on the right, both for its months 0 through 3. So as you can see, the guidelines are meant to provide recommendations and again, center the resident, their experiences, and provide accountability to create a mentorship program that suits their needs and creates an experience that will benefit the resident personally and professionally. You can see that on the right, the mentors are asked if they feel comfortable speaking with their mentee and if they have clear communication with the residency coordinator. If you're struggling to answer yes, then this might be a sign that you're not ready to be a mentor yet, or that your residency is not set up to fully support a resident's mentorship needs. So at first glance, these questions might seem obvious to some people, but it's important to remove the assumption that one, everyone knows how to be a mentor, and two, that they know best practices. And so instead, we want to focus on encouraging mentors, coordinators, and supervisors, and the residents as well, to think critically and really reflect on the resident mentorship program in place. I'm going to hand it back to Laura now. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. So in the, and next slide, please. So in the final section of the mentorship guidelines, within this, we wanted to provide the readers with additional resources to continue to support residents beyond typical mentorship models, which is something that we found through both the literature and our personal experiences, is that it was inconsistent, and usually they only focused really on the first year. And so, for example, one of the suggested resources we discuss in the toolkit is how to embed and develop a plan for leadership development for residents. Consider what your institution is currently doing to support career development. Could career coaching be part of the model or the program built into that mentorship, or from mentorship they move to a coaching model? Because as you may or may not know, resident positions are typically temporary. And so at some point, residents do have to begin the job, get on the job market. And so it does put residents in very precarious positions because they are openly applying for jobs, which is something that's not a traditional practice in our libraries, right? Like, we wouldn't be announcing that we're looking for a job while you're still employed in another piece. And so the feeling of support, as well as coaching through potential issues with being on the job market, is something that would be beneficial for residents, especially if we're centering on their personal experiences. Another reflective question to consider is, what does support look like when you're supporting your resident and connecting them beyond your institution? And so again, how are residents being supported? Are they being coached? Are they being instructed how to build a network? And are we providing those connections for them to help build their network? And again, since residency programs are unfortunately designed as a springboard into librarianship to address a pipeline issue, they aren't really specific about really that retention piece. And so we might, in this toolkit, we provide such resources to help folks consider potentially sponsorship models and what that might look like in terms of helping residents find placement beyond their institution. And sponsorship is in terms of when you have somebody in your organization who will vouch for somebody and help them connect to other networks and help them find placement, again, within the field. Because the goal of residency programs, it's to address the pipeline issue, but we really want to shift the focus on retention and building in that support. And so finally, as you build your program or enhance and refine your mentorship model, what topics would you like to ensure that your mentors or coaches or sponsors are covering? So this could be institutional based, this could be field based, or this should be also based on the residents' personal professional goals. Do they align with the residents' interests? Will they support the residents' long-term goals or address their professional needs? And again, all of these are guidelines and suggestions to cover when developing or refining your mentorship programs specifically for residents. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to the next slide. And I believe that is going to be Maya.
Thank you. So the residency support survey, there's a few different components. Our literature review identified 4 important factors in a resident's experience. So the survey is measuring mentorship, professional development, career advancement, and inclusion, and it's measuring it across 4 dimensions: existence, agency, institutional support and funding, and the resident librarian's engagement and satisfaction. So we recommend that this tool is designed to be taken by the resident at least twice during the residency. So you could take it once, maybe 3 months in, and then again, maybe at the year mark. If it's a 2-year residency, that's about a halfway point. You can also, supervisors can take it as well on behalf of the institution to measure perceived institutional success, but it's really meant for the resident themselves. And I'm going to pass it to Willa to talk more about how to interpret your survey results.
Thank you, Maya. So Maya's outlined those primary factors that create a supportive environment for resident librarians as taken from the literature review. So these 4 factors are the survey headings: mentorship, professional development, career advancement, and inclusion. And then under each heading, there are questions targeting the 4 dimensions of existence, agency, institutional support or funding, and the resident librarian's engagement or satisfaction. Some of the questions from the survey are highlighted on this slide. And this survey, it's really just in an Excel spreadsheet that can be downloaded as part of the Diversity Residency Toolkit. So it's really easy to use. Each question on the survey has a drop-down value that first delivers either a yes or no for whether the factor being examined exists. If the resident librarian selects no, 0 values are automatically entered for the remaining dimensions. And if the resident librarian selects yes, a value of 5 is automatically entered for the existence dimension. Then the resident librarian goes on to provide a rating of 1 to 5 for each of the other dimensions. The next slide, please. So the results after the survey is finished are displayed on a set of radar charts because there's an axis for each variable, and these are arranged radially around a central point and equally spaced. It's a really good way to get a quick view of performance analysis. You can easily see which variable is doing best and see strengths and weaknesses at a glance across common characteristics. So this lets you get a quick big picture view at how the residency is going from the respondent's perspective. So this results sheet contains 5 of these radar charts. The first one displays all the factors, then the individual charts display a single factor in turn across the 4 dimensions. So you'll see that in this particular set of results, you can easily see that mentorship is the weakest there. And then you can see how each of the others score on each of the factors being, the dimensions being measured for each factor. You can see that career advancement got full marks for everything. So the shape of the chart shows you the skew or the strength or weakness of each of the dimensions for the factor being measured. And we just want to reiterate that it's important to center the experience of the resident rather than just the effort of the institution in terms of providing support. So even if the someone in a supervisory position takes this just to see, you know, in their own mind how they think the residency is going, you know, they shouldn't like look at the resident's own before taking it, because you know you kind of don't want to skew the results. And we do have a research project that's based on this, for which we have our IRB approvals, and we'll be having like beta testing. And one of the things that we do as part of the beta testing is that we say actually the residents should submit this directly to the research group, to the principal investigators, without the institution seeing it, because we don't want the resident to feel any sort of pressure to rate any of these factors in a particular way because they know that there's some sort of oversight of how they're rating it. So yeah, centering the resident's experience. Next slide, please. And this is just a closer look at the questions, responses, and results for one factor. And again, you can see on the overall graph the dimension that corresponds to mentorship. It's the blue outline, and then you see the filled radar graph for it. So the mentorship opportunity existed, so there's an automatic 5 points, and you can see that the point of the filled radar graph goes all the way up to the top. And support was also rated a 5, so that point goes all the way to the bottom. However, agency was rated a 2, and engagement and satisfaction was rated a 3, so the radar points don't go all the way out to the side points. Of course, within institutions, if the resident wants to share that with, for example, the steering committee, the resident can do that if they want to initiate a discussion about how those areas might be strengthened. And it might simply be, for example, with this mentorship factor, that the resident might have an interest in a particular area which that mentor doesn't have the experience in. And maybe then the steering committee can point to someone else who might meet with the resident to foster or sponsor the resident's development in that particular area. In my case, I can share my personal experience. What my supervisor did was point me to an external mentorship program that we had access to, and that was really helpful. Next slide, please. So some takeaways for managers. Build, and I apologize for the amount of content on this slide. Probably should have split this up a bit. But building agency into the residency experience, that's really important. Have the resident help determine the trajectory for their participation and their focus areas in accordance with their career goals. And then put a strong emphasis on inclusion. Oftentimes, even if there are not resources within the library itself, there may be resources on the wider campus. Ensure that team building or social activities are inclusive, known safe spaces for people identifying as part of the LGBTQ2S plus society. Times that might be convenient for parents of young children. Also thoughtful location of resident workspace and needed facilities such as all gender bathrooms, nursing rooms, and minimize navigational requirements for persons with low sight or hearing. And some of the factors on the professional development and career advancement, the first bullet point was already spoken to, as well as the next one in terms of additional funding and dedicated time and resources to a job search if the resident will not be permanently hired. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we are beta testing this toolkit. Interested institutions can enroll, and we have rolling enrollment through June. And Michelle has just put the sign up form for beta testing in the chat. We have a few institutions who've already indicated that they will sign up for them. The feedback framework that will be completed as part of the beta testing are really just the documents of the 4 tools that are in the toolkit. The guidelines for the planning and steering committee, the pre-residency checklist, the guidelines for mentorship program, that checklist, and the residency support survey, which I just gave an overview of. So it's submitting your results of your assessment using the 4 tools that form a part of the toolkit. It'll be submitted via a Qualtrics form, which also has an informed consent document. And the reports that we're asking for will be 30 days after the start of a residency or start of beta testing if you've signed up after the residency has already started, to form a baseline, and then interim reports after 6-12 and where applicable 18 months, with a final reflection 30 days before the end of the residency. So we hope to launch in the summer, and by next spring have 2 community calls, one for participating residents and for institutional representatives. The residency subgroup will report out in an anonymized and aggregated manner, hopefully in summer 2023 and then again in summer 2024 for those residencies that are longer than 18 months. If you would like to meet with our subgroup to discuss this further, or if you have any questions, of course, we have time left for questions, and we'd also be happy to set up direct meetings for you. Thanks.
And speaking of contacting us, this is all of our contact information, but right at the top is a general email address where you could just reach out to us. And that's also, if you just have, it'll go to us and we check it regularly and we can respond in that way. But this marks the end of our presentation. And before we jump into the Q&A, we just want to say that we will be prioritizing audience questions about diversity residencies broadly. We cannot answer specific institutional questions. And so just to keep that in mind before we jump into the Q&A. Thank you.
Right, and thank you all so much, Willa and Kalani and Michelle, Maya, Mallory, Laura, and Anna. So as they mentioned, we'll go ahead and take time for questions. There's about 13 minutes left for that. So make sure to put your questions into the Q&A box, and then we will answer them as they come in. So for our first question, this person asks, I am on the hiring committee as well as our residency committee right now, so I am all in. What is the number one thing I should be thinking about through the hiring and onboarding process?
I can take that one. So in addition to the tools that's there for you to help you think about how you've prepared the institution, there are a couple of things I want to mention. Talk to the resident, see if there's any particular things that they need support with. I also want to mention that the Library Diversity Residency Institute, this was formerly held at UNC Greensboro and is taken over by Harvard. They developed a handbook for hiring and onboarding residents, which is really useful, and it takes you week by week what you should do in week 1, what you should do in week 2. Of course, every resident is different, which is why I always say keep the lines of communication open with the resident.
I can add that when you're in the hiring process, it's incredibly important to ensure that everybody that's part of the hiring process has been trained on inclusive practices. When I was a diversity resident, one of the things we also got to do was sit in on one of the groups that was involved in hiring practices. And so we could also see that another thing that's really important is really providing consistency among the different interviews. And so you want to provide everybody with that same experience. But the training piece is incredibly important. And I believe Sojourner Cunningham is in the audience. So I'm going to reference the article that was published, I think back in 2018 18, but it's on like challenging the good fit. And I feel like that's a great resource if you have not read it, to start there, because with residency positions, it's really difficult if they're rotating, if they're, there's a bit of ambiguity. And so it's not like you have a specific skill set that you are hiring for. And so it could get very tricky in terms of institutions looking for a good fit. And you want to really focus when you are thinking about the hiring piece is what is it that your residency program is trying to accomplish with this position? Are you looking to permanently fill a humanities position? Are you looking to have somebody rotate through the different areas and kind of choose their own adventure with the hope that long-term you're going to help them find a job somewhere else? And so what is it that you want this person to bring? Identify those skill sets in advance so that you can avoid that good fit. Are they going to fit here? So training and understanding of the position itself that you're trying to fill.
Right.
I also, can I just add one thing?
Of
Sorry,
course.
Emily.
No, you're good.
I just wanted to say that like communication is really key, especially like remembering that these are early career librarians, archivists, library workers. And so they will be as unfamiliar with like a residency as some of these institutions. So communicating, what are sort of the expectations, what is the library about? Like, what is their commitments to, DEI, having all of that information up front, because the people who are going to be applying for these positions are going to want to know what they're getting themselves into. And so having all of that kind of folds into that like preparedness piece. And I think even in the pre-residency checklist, we also recommend creating a learning plan once you kind of have settled into like who you are anticipating to hire in that onboarding process. Is those conversations, that early communication piece that will go both ways.
All right. So thank you so much for that informative answer. So the next question is, what is the biggest mistakes well-meaning organizations make when hiring / onboarding residents?
I have a response. I don't know if it's everyone's, probably different ideas, but for me, a really big mistake is just overestimating their preparedness and thinking that like good feelings towards diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives are like enough when there actually hasn't been work to structurally change things. I think that people overestimate the importance of like good feelings and think that that's enough somehow, when a lot of times it's just inviting people into really harmful environments. So being really realistic about if you're actually ready to host a resident, and like if the placement options are good, because sometimes it changes depending on the department. Some departments would be a really great environment and other ones not so much. So being really realistic about that and really trying to, center the resident, I guess. I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that I've seen.
I agree with what Kalani said. Being honest is really the most important, like kind of first step that an institution can make when you're looking at a residency program or assessing or evaluating the current residency program that you have. Exactly what Kalani says, the first thing that came to mind is the good feelings and like thinking that you're doing this really good work, but not actually being honest with your coworkers and the institution itself can really bring people into situations that are not good for them. And it kind of hurts everybody in the process. So
I also would like to add, not having your staff clear about the resident's role, not making it clear that this person is a librarian, they're fully qualified, just like any other early career librarian that you're hiring. There's a common experience coming out of the literature review and the lived experiences of many residents in ACRL Residency Interest Group is this is lack of clarity. Like, people don't know what to call you. What are you? They're a librarian. Make it clear that we're hiring a new librarian. They're in a residency program. They're fully qualified.
I wanted to add real quick, I agree with what Willis said, but thinking that the search committee, steering committee, anyone knows more than the resident and themselves, that they have like no experience, nothing, is also a well-meaning mistake. That you could be thinking that, oh, I'm just gonna like set this up to make it quote unquote easier. Just what Michelle was talking about, communication is key. So actually talking to the resident and not just making an assumption is another like well-meaning mistake that organizations make.
I could add to that. Another one is we often assume that as early career librarians, it's typically resident positions, we often make a well-meaning mistake of, we assume that they're also entry into a profession. And often, just like in librarianship, many of us are second, third career, fourth career professionals. And so many residents are coming in with an incredible amount of skill sets that are transferable. And we have seen that residents can be treated as like interns, new to the profession, and that they don't have any previous value that they can bring into the organization. And so remembering that they're new to the institution, but not necessarily new to the profession or new to professional work. And so that can also be something that can make a resident feel devalued or underskilled, I guess, and assuming that somebody may not know something.
All right, so I want to thank our presenters so much for taking the time to answer those questions. All of this definitely gives us a lot to think about when it comes to the hiring and retention of diversity residents. So it was also a pleasure to have you all with us. So we've got like a few minutes left. So before we close the session, I would like to point out the survey that is available for you to complete. I'm certain that the presenters would very much like your feedback. And so I had just dropped the link to the survey. I will put it in here again, just in case you missed it. The survey is also available in Sched directly above the session description. I'm still seeing some comments roll in, just everyone appreciating what you have talked about. So once again, I just want to thank you all for attending, and we hope you have enjoyed this presentation.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. And thank you, Monique, for moderating.
You're welcome.